My sister spent my entire medical fund on her wedding, so I sued. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. As I stood outside the country club holding the lawsuit, my spine burned with the pain my sister had literally stolen the cure for. The heavy legal binder in my hands felt like the only thing keeping me anchored to the earth. I'm Olivia, and for the last 6 years, my entire existence has been defined by a severe, deteriorating spinal condition. Every morning, waking up feels like jagged glass grinding between my vertebrae. My doctors told me that without a highly specialized, uninsured $40,000 surgical procedure, I would permanently lose feeling in my left leg by my 30s. So, I did what I had always done. I survived. I worked grueling hours at a logistics firm, took on freelance data entry at night, and lived in a tiny, drafty apartment just to save every single penny. I skipped vacations, I wore threadbare coats in the winter, and I ate rice and beans for months on end. Every dollar I deposited into my emergency savings account was a tiny step toward getting my life back, a down payment on a future where I wasn't defined by chronic agony. But none of my suffering mattered to my family. To them, my pain was just a mild inconvenience that occasionally threatened to overshadow the real star of our family, my younger sister, Chloe. While I was meticulously tracking my medical fund on a cracked laptop screen, Chloe was obsessing over Pinterest boards and designer dresses. I never imagined that the money I bled for, the literal price of my physical mobility, would become the ultimate casualty of her relentless vanity. My hands trembled as the country club valet stared at me, wondering why a woman in a cheap blazer was standing in the freezing rain outside a private event. I wasn't there for the champagne or the caviar, and I certainly wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to deliver a financial and social execution. I gripped the thick envelope containing the civil summons, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked through the massive glass windows and saw my sister laughing, holding a crystal flute, wearing a dress bought with my stolen future. I took a deep breath, ignoring the sharp, shooting pain radiating down my spine, and prepared to burn her perfect world to the ground. I stepped toward the polished brass doors, knowing there was absolutely no turning back now. To understand how my sister could be so relentlessly cruel, you have to understand the toxic ecosystem of our childhood. From the very moment Chloe was born, she was the undeniable golden child. She was loud, demanding, and fiercely obsessed with appearances. Our mother, Helen, worshipped the ground she walked on. If Chloe wanted a new dress for a middle school dance, Helen would max out a credit card without a second thought. If I needed money for a science fair project, Helen would tell me that building character through independence was the greatest gift a mother could give. I learned very early on that love in our house was entirely conditional and solely directed at my sister. When my spinal issues first started developing in my early 20s, Helen's only concern was how my medical appointments were inconveniently clashing with Chloe's sorority events. "You just need to push through it, Olivia," Helen would sigh, rolling her eyes as I winced in pain. "Chloe is under a lot of stress with recruitment, and we really need positive energy right now." That was always the mantra. Chloe's superficial desires completely eclipsed my fundamental needs. As we grew into adults, the dynamic only hardened. I moved out, got a modest job, and learned to manage my deteriorating health in complete isolation. Chloe, on the other hand, stayed home until she was 25, having her laundry done and her life funded by Helen's dwindling savings. Helen lived vicariously through Chloe's polished social media presence, treating every milestone like a royal coronation. When I first announced that a specialist had approved me for the complex spinal surgery, the only reaction I got from my mother was a distracted nod. She was too busy helping Chloe pick out a filter for an Instagram post to acknowledge that my life was about to be saved. I didn't care. I was used to being the invisible daughter, and I had long ago accepted that I had to rely solely on myself. But the one thing I failed to realize was just how far Helen would go to maintain her favorite daughter's perfect illusion. I severely underestimated the depths of their shared entitlement and the absolute lack of basic human empathy they possessed. The true nightmare began the day Chloe came home wearing a massive diamond ring. Chloe got engaged to Mark, a genuinely decent guy who came from a very wealthy, highly respected family. Mark was grounded, but his family's social circle meant the wedding had to be an absolute spectacle. Almost instantly, the budget spiraled violently out of control. Chloe wasn't just planning a wedding. She was producing a luxury theatrical event for her thousands of followers. Every single day brought a new, absurd escalation. It started with a venue upgrade, then shifted to imported exotic flowers, and finally settled on a lavish destination rehearsal dinner. Helen was in absolute heaven, acting as the frantic co-director of this impending financial disaster. But the reality was that Helen didn't have the capital to fund a high-society wedding. One evening, she called me, her voice dripping with that sickening, manipulative sweetness she only used when she wanted something. "Olivia, honey, your sister is just so stressed," Helen cooed over the phone. "The floral arrangements alone are $10,000. We were thinking, since you have all that money just sitting in a savings account, maybe you could lend it to the wedding fund? You can always have your little back procedure in a few years." I felt a sharp, white-hot spike of fury shoot up my spine. My little back procedure was the only thing standing between me and permanent nerve damage. I firmly, unequivocally refused. I told her that my medical fund was completely off limits and hung up the phone, my hands shaking with adrenaline. For the next 3 weeks, I ignored their calls. I focused entirely on my upcoming consultation, visualizing the moment the surgeon would tell me I was finally clear to schedule the operation. I thought setting a hard boundary would be the end of it. I assumed that even Helen, with all her twisted favoritism, would understand that taking my medical money was an uncrossable line. I genuinely believed my funds were safe, locked away in an account I had bled to build over half a decade. I had absolutely no idea that a bureaucratic oversight from my teenage years had left a backdoor wide open. My mother didn't need my permission to access my future because she already had the keys. The day I had been dreaming of for 6 long, agonizing years finally arrived. I walked into the sterile, brightly lit lobby of the specialized orthopedic clinic, clutching my paperwork like it was a winning lottery ticket. My pain was particularly severe that morning, a relentless, burning ache shooting down my left leg, but I barely registered it. I was finally crossing the finish line. The receptionist smiled warmly as she processed my surgical intake forms. "All right, Olivia, we just need the $40,000 deposit to secure your operating room for next month," she said, her fingers hovering over the credit card terminal. I proudly handed her my designated debit card, the one linked directly to the high-yield emergency savings account I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into. I watched the little machine blink, waiting for the comforting sound of approval. Instead, it beeped sharply. A red decline message flashed across the screen. The receptionist frowned, trying it a second time. Declined again. "I'm sorry, honey, it says insufficient funds," she murmured sympathetically. My heart completely stopped. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. That was mathematically impossible. I had checked the balance just a few weeks ago. There was exactly $42,500 sitting securely in that account. I apologized frantically, my hands shaking violently as I grabbed my phone and dialed the local bank branch. The automated system read back my available balance, and the robotic voice hit me like a physical punch to the gut. The balance was $34.12. I literally could not breathe. I stumbled out of the clinic, the burning pain in my spine entirely overshadowed by the sheer, unadulterated panic consuming my mind. This wasn't a banking error. This was an absolute catastrophe. I drove straight to the bank, my vision blurring with panicked tears, desperately hoping it was just a fraudulent hold or a technical glitch that could be reversed. I sprinted through the bank doors, demanding to see the branch manager immediately. I sat in his sterile glass office, gripping the desk as he pulled my file. The bank manager, a quiet, older man named Mr. Higgins, pulled up my transaction history on his monitor. He looked at the screen, then looked back at me with a deeply sympathetic expression. "Olivia, there was a massive outgoing wire transfer initiated exactly 2 weeks ago," he explained softly, turning the screen so I could see the devastating proof. There it was. A single, catastrophic line item. $42,400 wired directly to an account under the name Chloe Hastings. My sister. I stared at the numbers, completely paralyzed by shock. How is this possible? I choked out, tears spilling hot and fast down my cheeks. Nobody else has the password to this account. I never authorized this transfer. Mr. Higgins clicked a few buttons and pulled up the original signature card for the account. This is an older account, opened when you were 17. Because you were a minor at the time, your mother, Helen Hastings, was listed as a primary co-signer. She legally retained full administrative access. She authorized the wire transfer in person at our downtown branch. The sheer gravity of his words crushed the remaining breath out of my lungs. My mother, the woman who brought me into this world, had walked into a bank, looked a teller in the eye, and systematically drained the money I needed to save my physical body. She didn't hack me. She exploited a decade-old bureaucratic technicality that I had completely forgotten about. My entire world collapsed in that tiny, sterile office. 6 years of working overtime, 6 years of eating cheap noodles, 6 years of enduring excruciating, blinding physical pain. All of it wiped out in a single afternoon so my sister could have a slightly prettier party. I didn't scream, and I didn't faint. Instead, a terrifying, absolute numbness washed over my entire body. The sadness instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculated, and terrifying rage. I stood up, thanked Mr. Higgins for his time, and asked him to print every single piece of documentation regarding the wire transfer. I walked out of the bank with a thick folder of concrete evidence clutched in my fist. I was going to make them pay for every single penny. I drove straight to my mother's house, my knuckles completely white on the steering wheel. I didn't bother knocking. I pushed the front door open and marched directly into the living room. Chloe was standing on a velvet ottoman, admiring her reflection in a full-length mirror while trying on a pair of absurdly expensive designer bridal shoes. Helen was sitting on the couch, sipping herbal tea and taking photos of her on her phone. They both froze when they saw the lethal expression on my face. "Where is my money?" I demanded, my voice dangerously low and steady. Helen had the audacity to sigh, carefully setting her teacup down as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Olivia, please don't be so dramatic," she said smoothly, mastering the art of the immediate gaslight. "We were going to tell you. The wedding expenses just got a little bit out of hand, and Chloe really needed the funds to secure the country club for the rehearsal. You have plenty of time to save up for your surgery again. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event for your sister." I stared at them, absolutely revolted by the sheer casualness of their betrayal. "You stole $42,000 from my medical fund." I gritted out, the physical pain in my back surging in tandem with my anger. Chloe finally looked away from the mirror, rolling her eyes in deep annoyance. "Oh my God, Olivia, stop making my wedding all about you," she whined petulantly. "Mark's family is used to a certain standard, and I can't look cheap. You can just postpone your surgery for a few years. It's not like you're actually dying." The sheer sociopathic lack of empathy in her voice was breathtaking. They honestly believed that a single evening of champagne and Instagram photos was vastly more important than my ability to walk without chronic, searing agony. I didn't scream, and I didn't break down crying like they expected me to. I just looked at the two women who were supposed to be my family, realizing they were nothing but complete strangers to me now. I tightened my grip on the thick folder of printed banking documents. "I am giving you exactly 48 hours to return every single cent to my account," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "If the money is not wired back by Friday afternoon, I am going straight to the police, and I will press charges for grand larceny." Helen's smug expression instantly dropped, replaced by theatrical, hyperventilating tears. She clutched her pearls, literally sobbing about how I was trying to destroy the family and ruin Chloe's special day. "How could you be so incredibly selfish?" Chloe shrieked, stepping off the ottoman and pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "If you involve the cops, Mark's family will find out, and it will be a massive scandal. You are a horrible, vindictive sister." I didn't flinch. I just turned my back on them and walked out the front door, leaving Helen wailing on the couch and Chloe screaming obscenities from the porch. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. Chloe had sent a vile text message calling me a sociopath before permanently blocking my number. Helen sent a long, manipulative paragraph about how disappointed my late father would be in my complete lack of family loyalty. I read the messages in the silence of my car and realized something deeply, profoundly liberating. My family was completely dead to me. The invisible chains of obligation and guilt that had bound me to them for 28 years completely evaporated. I didn't owe them my health, I didn't owe them my money, and I certainly didn't owe them my silence. When the 48-hour deadline passed on Friday afternoon, I checked my bank account. The balance was still exactly $34.12. They had called my bluff, genuinely believing I was too weak and submissive to ever take real, destructive action against my own flesh and blood. They thought I would just quietly accept a lifetime of physical pain to preserve their superficial social image. They were about to learn exactly how dangerous I could be. My first stop on Monday morning was the local police precinct. I sat down with a weary detective and laid out the bank statements, the transfer receipts, and the text messages. He looked through the paperwork, sighed heavily, and delivered a crushing blow. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but because your mother's name was legally on the joint account, she had the legal authority to withdraw the funds," he explained sympathetically. "The police can't treat this as criminal theft. It's entirely a civil matter." I thanked him, walked out to my car, and immediately began searching for the most ruthless civil litigation attorneys in the metropolitan area. That's how I found Mr. Vance. He was a sharp, methodical corporate attorney in his late 40s with a reputation for aggressively dismantling financial fraudsters. I sat in his high-end office, ignoring the throbbing pain in my spine, and laid the entire folder on his polished mahogany desk. Mr. Vance reviewed the documents in complete silence for 10 minutes. When he finally looked up, a terrifying, predatory smile spread across his face. "The police are right. It's not criminal theft," Mr. Vance said smoothly, leaning back in his leather chair. "But legally, this is a textbook case of civil fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and unjust enrichment. Your mother transferred funds that were clearly designated and utilized exclusively by you for the sole purpose of enriching your sister. We are going to hit them with a devastating civil lawsuit." He explained that we would immediately subpoena Chloe's bank records to trace exactly where my medical money had gone. We were going to build an ironclad paper trail proving that my health was sacrificed for her luxury wedding vendors. I paid his retainer using a high-interest credit card, knowing it was the best investment I would ever make. I walked out of his office feeling a dark, powerful sense of anticipation. We were going to legally dismantle my sister's perfect fairy tale. Within 2 weeks, Mr. Vance had successfully subpoenaed Chloe's financial records. Sitting in his office, we spread the highlighted bank statements across a massive conference table. It was absolutely sickening to see my physical health converted into itemized luxury receipts. We traced my exact medical funds to the most absurd, excessive purchases imaginable. There was a direct wire transfer of $15,000 to an exclusive bridal boutique for a custom-made, imported Italian silk gown. Another $8,500 was blown on a non-refundable, 2-week luxury honeymoon package to the Maldives. She even spent $4,000 of my literal blood money on imported peonies and custom-carved ice sculptures for the rehearsal dinner. Every single transaction felt like a fresh, sharp knife twisting directly into my damaged spine. "This is phenomenal evidence, Olivia," Mr. Vance noted, meticulously organizing the vendor receipts into a chronological timeline. "Chloe is undeniably the direct beneficiary of the fraudulent transfer, which makes her entirely liable in the civil suit. We have her dead to rights." But as we finalized the legal strategy, a new, crucial piece of the puzzle clicked into place in my mind. I thought about Chloe's fiancé, Mark. Mark came from a very strict, traditional, and highly honorable family. His parents built their wealth on reputation and corporate integrity. I suddenly remembered a smug comment Chloe had made a few months ago. She had bragged that Mark's family was deeply impressed that Helen was paying for the massive rehearsal dinner and the bride's expenses out of a secret family inheritance. Mark had absolutely no idea that his opulent wedding was actively being funded by his future sister-in-law's stolen medical money. He was completely in the dark, happily enjoying the illusion of my mother's generosity. I realized in that moment that Mark wasn't the enemy. He was the ultimate leverage. If I played my cards right, the lawsuit wouldn't just recover my money. It would expose her lies to the one person she desperately wanted to impress. The more I thought about Mark, the more I understood exactly how to strike. Mark was a man who valued honesty above almost everything else. His entire career in corporate finance was built on transparency and ethical boundaries. If he found out that his beautiful, charming fiancée and his sweet future mother-in-law were actually financial predators who stole from a disabled family member, the fallout would be absolutely catastrophic. He wouldn't just be angry, he would be utterly disgusted. This was the weak link in Chloe's perfect, manicured armor. I shared this revelation with Mr. Vance. In civil litigation, leverage is everything. Vance smiled, tapping his expensive pen against the desk. If we file quietly, they might try to drag this out in court for years, draining your resources. But if we serve her publicly, at a moment where her social and romantic future is entirely on the line, she will be forced to settle immediately to make the problem disappear. We needed a strategic venue for the legal strike. It couldn't just be a random Tuesday morning at her apartment where she could hide the paperwork. It needed to be a moment of maximum exposure, surrounded by the people she cared about deceiving the most. We looked at the detailed wedding itinerary that Helen had so proudly posted on her public Facebook page, flaunting the luxury events. The wedding itself was too chaotic, and security would be incredibly tight. But the rehearsal dinner, that was absolutely perfect. It was being held at an incredibly exclusive, high-end country club on a Friday night. It was an intimate gathering of just the bridal party and Mark's extremely wealthy, conservative parents. It was the exact environment where Chloe desperately needed to project an aura of absolute perfection and high social class. I told Mr. Vance to finalize the lawsuit documents and prepare for an aggressive, highly visible delivery. We were going to crash the most important dinner of her life. Mr. Vance was an absolute master of legal theater. Over the next few days, we meticulously drafted the civil strike. We didn't just file a standard, boring complaint for unjust enrichment. We created a devastating, irrefutable narrative of financial abuse. Vance itemized every single stolen dollar directly next to my official medical records and the surgeon's desperate notes regarding my deteriorating spinal condition. Page 4 of the binder literally displayed the $15,000 receipt for the custom bridal gown directly adjacent to the exact cost of the surgical titanium screws required to save my left leg. It was a brutal, undeniable visual representation of their sheer sociopathy. When she reads this, she's going to realize that no judge in this state will ever side with her, Vance assured me, handing me the massive, heavy legal binder. But more importantly, when her fiancé reads this, he's going to realize exactly who he is marrying. Because I was a direct party to the lawsuit, I couldn't legally serve the papers myself, so Vance hired a professional process server named Dave to accompany me. Dave was a massive, intimidating guy who specialized in highly confrontational deliveries. The plan was simple. I would walk into the dining room to create the distraction and set the emotional stage, and Dave would trail directly behind me to legally drop the documents on her plate. On the night of the rehearsal dinner, the freezing rain poured down from the black sky, soaking through my cheap blazer. The pain in my spine was screaming, a sharp, white-hot agony that threatened to buckle my knees in the country club parking lot. But the adrenaline surging through my veins was far stronger than the physical pain. I watched the valet park the luxury cars of Mark's elite family members. I took a deep, shaky breath, gripping the cold brass handle of the country club door. I was finally ready to expose the monsters hiding under the facade of my family. I pushed through the heavy brass doors of the country club, Dave the process server walking quietly just 3 steps behind me. The main lobby was overwhelmingly opulent, dripping with crystal chandeliers and thick velvet curtains. From down the hall, I could hear the gentle clinking of expensive crystal and the soft murmur of polite, high society conversation radiating from the private dining hall. As I approached the grand mahogany doors of the private room, Helen suddenly stepped out into the hallway, likely heading toward the upscale restrooms. When she saw me, her fake, serene smile instantly vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. "Olivia, what in the world are you doing here?" she hissed, darting forward to physically block my path to the dining room doors. "You are completely uninvited. You need to turn around and leave right now before you ruin your sister's perfect evening." I looked down at the woman who had sold my physical mobility for a few imported flowers, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, sterile pity. "I'm not here to celebrate, Helen," I said quietly, my voice completely devoid of warmth. "I'm here to collect." Helen's eyes darted nervously to the massive man standing silently behind me. She tried to grab my arm, her manicured claws digging into my cheap blazer. "I will call security. You are not ruining this," she desperately whispered, her perfectly styled hair trembling with anxiety. I effortlessly shrugged off her grip, ignoring the sharp spike of pain radiating down my damaged spine. I didn't say another word to her. I simply reached out, firmly pushed the grand mahogany doors wide open, and confidently stepped directly into the lion's den. The soft jazz music playing in the background seemed to instantly stop as my wet shoes squeaked aggressively against the polished hardwood floor. The entire room went completely silent as every single head snapped toward the entrance. The private dining hall was a masterclass in absurd, stolen luxury. There were massive, cascading arrangements of imported white peonies covering every inch of the tables, and incredibly intricate ice sculptures slowly melting in the corners. Chloe was sitting at the head table, wearing a sleek, white designer cocktail dress, laughing loudly with Mark's conservative, elegant parents. When Chloe's eyes finally locked onto me standing in the doorway, the color completely drained from her heavily contoured face. "Olivia?" Mark asked, standing up with a confused, polite smile. We didn't think you were coming. Helen said you were too sick to travel." I ignored Mark entirely. I marched straight past the shocked waiters and the whispering bridal party, heading directly for the head table. Chloe stood up, her hands visibly shaking, knocking over a crystal champagne flute in her sheer panic. "Get out!" Chloe shrieked, her carefully crafted high society persona instantly shattering into a million jagged pieces. "Security! Somebody get her out of here right now." I stopped exactly 2 feet away from her, my eyes locked dead onto hers. I didn't yell, and I didn't cause a scene. I just stepped aside, allowing Dave the process server to step forward. Dave seamlessly slid the massive, heavy legal binder directly onto Chloe's custom monogrammed dinner plate. The sound of the thick stack of papers slamming against the fine china echoed like a gunshot through the silent, tense room. "Chloe Hastings, you are officially served," Dave announced clearly, stepping back. Chloe stared at the binder like it was a live explosive device, absolutely paralyzed by terror, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Mark looked from the binder to me, his brow furrowing in deep, terrified confusion. He reached out with a trembling hand and opened the heavy legal document. His eyes slowly scanned the aggressive, bold lettering on the very first page. Mark read the first page in absolute, horrified silence. The document boldly outlined the lawsuit for civil fraud and unjust enrichment, explicitly detailing the theft of a disabled woman's medical fund. I watched Mark's eyes dart down to the itemized evidence sheet on page 4, where Mr. Vance had perfectly contrasted the $15,000 bridal gown receipt against my $40,000 surgical estimate. "Mark, please don't read that garbage." Chloe suddenly screamed, lunging forward to rip the binder out of his hands, but Mark aggressively yanked it away from her grasp. "Is this true?" Mark demanded, his voice trembling with a potent mix of shock and rising disgust. He looked directly at Helen, who had just rushed into the room, sobbing hysterically near the entrance. "Did you steal $42,000 from your sick daughter to pay for these absurd ice sculptures?" Helen couldn't speak. She just buried her face in her hands, essentially confirming my entire case in front of Mark's wealthy parents. Mark's father stood up, his face flushed with deep, undeniable anger, realizing his highly honorable family was about to be legally tied to a massive financial fraud scandal. "We were just borrowing the money." Chloe cried desperately, thick black tears ruining her expensive bridal makeup. "Olivia was going to get it back eventually. She's just trying to ruin my perfect life out of pure, bitter jealousy." Mark looked at her as if she were a total stranger, absolute revulsion clear in his dark eyes. He slowly closed the heavy legal binder and dropped it back onto her pristine dinner plate. "You are completely out of your mind," Mark said, his voice terrifyingly calm and resolute. "The wedding is officially canceled, Chloe. Don't ever contact me or my family again." He turned around and walked out of the dining room, closely followed by his deeply embarrassed parents. The devastation in the room left my sister completely destroyed in her stolen luxury. The immediate aftermath of the rehearsal dinner was a complete and utter bloodbath. Mark's family moved with terrifying corporate efficiency to distance themselves from the scandal. They didn't just cancel the wedding. Mark's father explicitly threatened to launch his own aggressive legal action against Helen for fraud if they didn't immediately settle my lawsuit to keep the story out of the press. Terrified of facing two massive legal battles and complete public ruin, Helen and Chloe completely folded within a matter of days. To pay me back without going to trial, Helen was forced to rapidly liquidate her retirement portfolio, taking a massive penalty hit, and Chloe had to sell the unworn $15,000 custom bridal gown at a fraction of the cost. 6 weeks later, a cashier's check for $42,400, plus all of Mr. Vance's legal fees, was securely deposited into my brand-new, individually owned bank account. I didn't feel a shred of guilt when I blocked both of their phone numbers permanently. I took my money, paid the deposit at the clinic, and finally had the complex spinal surgery I so desperately needed. Today, I am walking completely pain-free for the first time in over 6 years. The jagged glass in my spine has been permanently removed, replaced by strong titanium and a profound sense of independence. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Chloe is currently living back in Helen's cramped basement, completely disgraced, while Mark recently got engaged to a wonderful, honest woman. I used to believe that family was an unbreakable bond, an unconditional contract that you simply had to endure no matter the cost. But standing up for myself taught me the most valuable lesson of my entire life. True peace only comes when you ruthlessly protect your boundaries and realize your self-worth is never up for negotiation. True healing begins the exact moment you let the toxic people in your life burn.